Theater of identity. Theater of identity promotes a particular people's cultural identity and invites members of that culture and other cultures to experience the culture's joys, problems, history, traditions, and point of view. This type of theater gives a voice to people and encourages audience members to reflect on, analyze, or reinvent their own self-perceptions. In the U.S., theater of identity grew out of the wide variety of traditions that make up our diverse population. People fleeing from the French Revolution in 1789 started French American theater. One of the first African American theaters was founded in New York City in 1821. In the 1800s, German, Polish, Chinese, Norwegian, and Swedish theaters were founded across the country. These theaters provided art and entertainment for millions of new immigrants whose cultural language differences, as well as outright discrimination, kept them out of mainstream American life. We also have Yiddish theater. During the first half of the 20th century, New York City's 2nd Avenue was known as the Yiddish Broadway because so many Jewish theaters were located there. The Harlem Renaissance, so vocab. The Harlem Renaissance was a time when Black artists, actors, poets, and musicians and writers converged in Harlem to tell stories of their lives, their histories, their people, contrary to white stereotypes of Blacks. Before this, Black characters were mainly stereotypes written by whites and even performed by them.
This is Crash Course Theater, and today we're exploring the Harlem Renaissance. This 1920s movement, centered in an uptown Manhattan neighborhood, encouraged a dynamic reawakening and reimagining of art, music, and literature. It was a very necessary corrective to all of those decades of melodramas, minstrelsy, and blackface. And unlike the other Renaissance, there was no bubonic plague. We'll take a look at the Harlem Renaissance more broadly and then explore the playwrights and theater companies it birthed. Lights up. The Harlem Renaissance roughly spanned the 1920s, spreading out from Harlem and across America's Northeast. Writer James Weldon Johnson wrote about the Harlem of that era, not merely a colony or a community or a settlement, but a Black city located in the heart of white Manhattan and containing more Negroes to the square mile than any other spot on Earth. It strikes the uninformed observer as a phenomenon. A miracle. First characterized by the writer Alain Locke as the New Negro movement, the Harlem Renaissance was by and for people who had arrived from the South during the Great Migration, and others who had arrived in the United States via the Caribbean diaspora. The movement invited African American artists to practice forms of art that would shatter stereotypes, increase visibility, and uplift Black Americans. Much of the work was celebratory, but artists didn't shy away from difficult themes. Alienation, discrimination, and the discomfort of performing Black identity in a white world were all explored. This is an example of the phenomenon that theorist and activist W.E.B. Du Bois described as double consciousness, the feeling of being Black and American at the same time, of seeing yourself as simultaneously part of and not part of society. In terms of form and genre, some artists of the period looked back to distinctly African and African American folk forms, like fables and spirituals, while others looked to newer forms, like the fractured modernism of Jean Toomer's Cain, or the jazz-echoing rhythms of poems by Langston Hughes and Geraldine Brooks. The Harlem Renaissance was pretty much the moment when the white world, and also a lot of the Black world, began to celebrate Black artists. This doesn't mean that Black artists were new to America, far from it, but many of them hadn't been known or honored outside of their communities. In the 1920s, theaters in New York were still largely segregated. Blacks and whites typically sat in different sections, and I'm sad to report that blackface was still a thing. In 1903, there had been a Broadway musical comedy, In Dahomey, written by and starring African Americans, as well as several other Broadway-adjacent musicals by Black composers. Though, like In Dahomey, these relied pretty heavily on stereotype. In terms of serious, non-musical plays, the white playwright Ridgely Torrance created a sensation with 3 plays for a Negro theater, crafting realistic portrayals of black life. These plays were originally performed by white actors, but in 1917, an all-black cast, directed by Robert Edmond Jones, led the Broadway production. This was a Broadway first. 3 Negro plays played by Negroes was the headline in the New York Times. The critic said that the interesting and sympathetic plays were inadequately acted. In the same year, one of Manhattan's little theaters, the Neighborhood Playhouse, hosted Rachel, a play written by a black playwright, Angelina Grimke, and staged with an all-black cast. Rachel is the story of a young African-American woman so shaken by the racism she discovers all around her that she vows to never have children. The early 20th century saw an enormous upsurge in black theater companies. The first important African-American theater company of this era was Anita Bush's Bush Players, later called the Lafayette Players, founded in 1916. Most of the Bush Players plays were written by white playwrights, but they were performed for mostly black audiences. Other early companies included the Ida Anderson Players, the Acme Players, which later became the National Ethiopian Art Theater, and the Negro Players, the company that had first performed 3 plays for a Negro theater. In the midst of the Harlem Renaissance, Du Bois, then editor of the NAACP's monthly magazine The Crisis, founded CRIGWA, which is almost an acronym for the Crisis Guild of Writers and Artists. CRIGWA sponsored a playwriting contest and encouraged entrants to write about things as you know them. You do not have to confine your writings to the portrayal of beggars, scoundrels, and prostitutes. You can write about ordinary, decent colored people if you want. On the other hand, do not fear the truth. Plumb the depths. If you want to paint crime and destitution and evil, paint it. But be true, be sincere, be thorough, and do a beautiful job. Opportunity, an African-American literary journal, also sponsored a playwriting contest, awarding prizes to Zora Neale Hurston and Eulalie Spence. In 1925, Du Bois and Regina Anderson founded the CRIGWA Players, headquartered in the basement of a public library on 135th Street. While it only lasted for 3 seasons before splitting into a number of offshoots, it was probably the most influential African-American theater troupe, owing to its insistence that works be performed, written, and directed by black artists. In 1926, Du Bois published an influential manifesto in The Crisis, establishing what African American theater should be. 1. About us. That is, they must have plots which reveal Negro life as it is. 2. By us. That is, they must be written by Negro authors who understand from birth and continued association just what it means to be a Negro today. 3. For us. That is, the theater must cater primarily to Negro audiences and be supported and sustained by their entertainment and approval. 4. Near us. The theater must be in a Negro neighborhood near the mass of ordinary Negro people. While a lot of the innovation was happening in the little theaters, African-American works were making it to Broadway too. In 1921, the team of Noble Sissle and Eubie Blake introduced Shuffle Along, a wildly successful jazz musical that featured Josephine Baker and Paul Robeson in small roles. Langston Hughes called it a honey of a show, swift, bright, funny, rollicking, and gay, with a dozen danceable, singable tunes. Everybody was in the audience, including me. Shuffle Along set off a minor craze for African-American shows, and 9 more made it to Broadway in the next 3 years. In 1923, Willis Richardson, who had won the CRIGWA playwriting contest several times, had a 1-act slice-of-life play, The Chip Woman's Fortune, which was produced on Broadway and earned pretty good reviews. In 1925, Garland Anderson's Appearances, a melodrama about a black bellhop falsely accused of rape, became the first full-length straight play by an African-American author to open on Broadway. But most Broadway plays about black life were still the work of white playwrights, who sometimes even won Pulitzer Prizes for them. Let's look at 2 key figures of the Harlem Renaissance, Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston. Hurston, a folklorist and novelist, was an early winner of the Opportunity Playwriting Contest. Color Struck, an Opportunity winner, is about colorism among a group of black Floridians. The play makes use of Southern black speech, which Hurston, a trained anthropologist, carefully studied. Hurston later channeled an interest in African and African-American folk tales into several reviews: The Great Day, From Sun to Sun, and Singing Steel. Better known as a poet, Hughes had a Broadway hit in 1935 with Mulatto, a poetic play about a mixed-race child and his desire to be acknowledged as his father's heir. Hughes subtitled the play a tragedy, but when it was produced on Broadway, changes were made that brought it closer to melodrama, making it more palatable to a white audience. Hughes was not thrilled. He once told James Baldwin, "If you want to die, be maladjusted, neurotic and psychotic, disappointed and disjointed. Just write plays. Go ahead." Still, he established 3 theater companies: the Suitcase Theater in Harlem, the Negro Art Theater in Los Angeles, and the Skyloft Players in Chicago, and continued to write plays and lyrics throughout his life, including Little Ham, a folk comedy celebrating Harlem in the 20s. Together, Hurston and Hughes collaborated on the 1930 play Mulebone. Based on a Florida folktale, it's a comedy about 2 men who come to blows over a woman. But Hurston and Hughes' working relationship soured, and the play was never finished. For a closer look at the theater of the Harlem Renaissance, let's explore Don't You Want to Be Free?, a play Hughes wrote in 1937 for the Suitcase Theater. When the play begins, the stage is bare except for a lynching rope and an auction block. A young man steps out and explains the set. "We haven't got any scenery or painted curtains because we haven't got any money to buy them. But we've got something you can't buy with money anyway. We've got faith in ourselves and in you. So we're going to put on a show." And the show, he says, is about what it means to be black in America. Help us out, Thought Bubble. Cymbals crash and tom-toms thump as a young woman begins to dance an African dance while reciting some of Hughes's poetry. She's joined by a young man who describes the capture of slaves and their arrival at Jamestown in 1619. Several characters are sold as slaves, but one young man resists. While he's being whipped, other characters begin to sing his protest song, "Go Down Moses." The Civil War arrives, then sharecropping and Jim Crow, then the Great Migration, the Harlem Renaissance, the Great Depression, the first stirrings of the Civil Rights Movement. In every scene, characters chant poems, and the chorus sings hymns and spirituals. Toward the end of the pageant, the residents of Harlem begin to resist the landlords and small business owners who discriminate against them. This move culminates in the 1935 Harlem Riots. The play then directly asks the audience to organize, join unions and tenants leagues, and get together with members of the white working class. As one character says, "When black and white really get together, what power in the world can stop us from getting what we want?" The show ends with the entire cast linking hands with the audience and singing, "Oh, who wants to come and join hands with me? Who wants to make one great unity? Who wants to say, no more black or white? Then let's get together, folks, and fight, fight, fight. Fight, fight, fight." Wow. Thanks, Thought Bubble. This pageant is modern, fragmentary, almost Brechtian. We're going to get to that adjective soon. It uses theater to make some clear political points. But in its reliance on poetry, music, and dance, Don't You Want to Be Free also argues that African-American performance is inextricable from African-American history, and that it will accompany people of color as they push for greater equality.
Two of the best examples of playwrights that represent growing diversity of American theater scene are August Wilson and Susan Laurie Parks. August Wilson. Wilson spent his youth in the public library after dropping out of school because of the daily racism he faced, and he educated himself. He had his first big writing success with Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, a play about black musicians struggling with their white bosses in the 1920s. This play was produced by Yale Repertory Theater and then later Broadway. Yale premiered 6 out of 10 of his Pittsburgh cycle plays.
White folks don't understand about the blues. They hear it come out, but they don't know how it got there. They don't understand it's life's way of talking. You don't sing to feel better. You sing because that's a way of understanding life. The blues help you get out of bed in the morning. You get up knowing you ain't alone. There's something else in the world. Something's been added by that song. This be an empty world without the blues. I take that emptiness and I try to fill it up with something.
August Wilson's plays have chronicled the decades-long struggle of blacks in native Pittsburgh. These plays were titled The Pittsburgh Cycle. We have Gem of the Ocean, Joe Turner's Come and Gone, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, The Piano Lesson, Seven Guitars, Fences, Two Trains Running, Jitney, King Hedley II, and Radio Golf. His second play, Fences, opened on Broadway in 1987. It was set in the 1950s and tells the story of Tony Maxson, a garbage collector who has become embittered by the white-controlled system that denied him the baseball stardom he feels he deserves. For this play, August Wilson won a Pulitzer Prize. You might have most recently seen that it was done into a movie, which won an Oscar, and it was with Denzel Washington and Viola Davis.
We ain't talking about baseball. We're talking about you going off and laying up with another woman and bringing it home to me. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about no baseball.
You're not listening to me. I'm trying to explain it to you the best way I know how. It's not easy for me to admit that I've been standing in the same place for 18 years.
Well, I've been standing with you. I've been right here with you, Troy. I got a life, too. I gave 18 years of my life to stand in the same spot as you. Don't you think I ever wanted other things? Don't you think I had dreams and hopes? What about my life? What about me? Don't you think it ever crossed my mind to want to know other men? That I wanted to lay up somewhere and forget about my responsibilities? That I wanted someone to make me laugh so I could feel good? You're not the only one who's got wants and needs, but I held on to you, Troy. I took all my feelings, my wants and needs and dreams, and I buried them inside you. I planted a seed and watched and prayed over. I planted myself inside you and waited to bloom. It didn't take me no 18 years to realize the soil was hard and rocky and it wasn't never gonna bloom. But I held on to you, Troy. I held you tighter. You was my husband. I owed you everything I had, every part of me I could find to give you. And upstairs in that bedroom with the darkness falling in on me, I gave everything I had to try and erase the doubt that you wasn't the finest man in the world, and wherever you was going, I was going to be there with you because you was my husband. Because that's the only way I was going to survive as your wife. You're always talking about what you give and what you don't have to give. But you take too, Troy. You take and don't even know nobody's giving.
You say I take and don't give.
Troy,
you
you
say
hurt me.
I take and don't
Troy,
give.
you hurt my arm.
I don't
Let
give
go.
you everything I got. Don't you tell that lie
Troy,
on me. Don't you
Mama.
tell that lie
Troy,
on me.
Troy, you hurt me. Troy, Troy.
All right. That's strike two. You stay away from around me, boy. Don't you strike out.
Susan Laurie Parks. She lived a transient childhood of an army brat. This allowed her to experience many different worlds, but friendships were hard to maintain, so she entertained herself by staging puppet shows. She took a creative writing class, and her teacher told her she was a natural playwright. After that, she started staging plays wherever she could find an empty space, once even using a garage at a gas station. See, remember I told you theater spaces can be everywhere? Garage at a gas station. Within a few years, she had graduated from garages to the notable theater like the Public House in New York City. Her play, Top Dog, Underdog, is a dark comedy about sibling rivalry between two brothers. It deals with the oppressive system within society. With this play, Parks became the first African-American woman to win the Pulitzer.
Open it! Open it! Open it up, bro!
Don't.
People look at my play, Top Dog Underdog, and do ask me, what does it mean? What's it about? What's the point of that? What are the issues you're trying to... It's just two brothers in a room, even if their names weren't Lincoln and Booth, I think. You know, but they're just two people who came from the same two pieces of flesh, and... that's a lot. Just that is a lot, you know?
That was my inheritance, man. You stole my inheritance. That ain't right. That ain't right, and you know it. Because you had your own, and you blew it.
When I'm writing the characters and I have to get them out of my system, it's a great feeling to see them up on stage, or even on the page. It's a great feeling because they're free. They're out of me. If they were to stay in me, they would strangle me. It's true.
At the beginning, I think a lot of us thought that Suzan-Lori Parks, for all her admirable qualities, was going to be a cult favorite. She's audacious. She's willing to take on big American topics, but somehow she manages to make them work without dumbing down and without selling out.
So it was January 1999. I was having a difficult time at this regional theater. I was between a rock and a hard place. And the only thing I could think to do was write. So I just sat down and wrote this play. It's about two brothers, Lincoln and Booth. And the Lincoln character, his real name's Lincoln, but he also is a Lincoln impersonator. And he works in an arcade impersonating Abraham Lincoln.
People are funny about their Lincoln shit. It's historical. People like their historical shit in a certain way. They like it to unfold the way they folded it up, neatly like a book, not raggedy and bloody and screaming. You're trying to get me fired. I'm a brother playing Lincoln. That's a stretch for anybody's imagination.
Someone got mad at me once because they said, you don't write about yourself, you never write about yourself, you know? And, but really I do write about myself all the time. It's just that myself, in the bigger sense of the understanding of that term, is actually, you know, everybody. We are all everybody.
You didn't get shit tonight.
Oh, you just jealous, man.
You laying over there, your balls blue as my boosted suit. You laying over there waiting for me to fall asleep or black out or something so I won't hear you rustling the pages of your fuck book.
Oh, fuck you, man.
I was over there looking for something the other week and there's about 100 fuck books under your bed and they all matted together like a bad fro, bro. Cause you spunked in the pages and you didn't wipe them off.
Hey, I'm hot. I need constant sexual release. Hey, if I wasn't taking care of myself by myself, I'd be out there running around on the town, which costs cash that I don't have. So I'd be out there doing worse. I'd be out there doing who knows what. Man, I'd be out there shooting people and shit. Out of a need for unresolved sexual release. Hey, I am a hot man. I ain't apologizing for it.
A lot of people have kind of looked at me funny and they say, how did you write this? You know, as if, you know, I'm really weird or something. You know, or something, you know, you must have a dick, you know, if you wrote this play. And I said, well, you know, no, I don't, duh, but it's odd that people think that that's the only way that you can write, you know, plays about people who talk about their dicks, is to have one.
We have to talk about the obvious, which is that Lincoln and Booth were two historical white men, and you have chosen two black men to play these brothers named Lincoln and Booth. So this has to be an exploration of race at the same time that it's an exploration of just brotherly rivalry.
I guess. I don't know. You know, with black people, when they hang out, is it an exploration of race? Just two black people in a room together? You know, maybe. I mean, sure. But I wasn't thinking, I wasn't planning, I wasn't plotting, I wasn't strategizing, I wasn't thinking of issues or themes or anything. There was absolutely none of that. I was just moving my hands around on the keyboard, listening, and just writing down what was, it was like it was a movie going on in front of me, and I was writing really fast to keep up.